Yup, you read that title right. This game took me 12 years, give or take, to finally play through to completion. I know, you must be thinking, wow, your playtime must be redonkulous, dude. Show pics! Well, obviously I don't mean it actually took me 12 in-game years of playtime to beat the entire thing, no. I mean that ever since I first picked up the game as a tween on the Wii, I never actually sat down and played the godforsaken game from start to finish until June 29th, 2022. There were many times that I tried to complete it. First, it was back on the Wii, where I got as far as the Aerith Sea before I ended up bricking my Wii because I was an idiot teenager trying to get free Nintendo games. Serves me right. Then I went to emulators, getting as far as the 7th party member, before putting it back down for a very long time. Once the definitive edition got announced, I knew that I had to purchase it for my Switch. This was the height of the pandemic. I figured, hell, if I'm gonna be stuck inside all day, might as well finally try to finish this game on one of the best Nintendo consoles our generation's ever had. And then it still took me 2 years. Hell, I even beat Xenoblade Chronicles 2 way before I ever beat 1. For a long time, I even thought 2 was better than 1. Sure, it was anime and cutesy and the characters weren't nearly as compelling, probably due to Rex's god-awful voice acting. But the game really begins to hold its own the more you play it, with serious undertones and themes lurking underneath these cutesy anime characters. Still though, considering that I really enjoyed Xenoblade 2, I don't really know why it took me so long to beat the first one. Maybe due to how many times I had to replay through so many familiar sections. But I have to say, after having completed the journey from start to finish, I feel that the journey was well worth it. From this point forward, I will be discussing major plot points that occur within Xenoblade Chronicles, so if you haven't played the game already, I highly recommend you do so before continuing onward. Without further ado, let's talk about Xenoblade Chronicles and the conclusion that took me 12 years to finally see. Finishing Xenoblade Chronicles was a weird feeling. On the one hand, it was extremely satisfying to see the conclusion to a story that I've left open-ended for over a decade. On the other, there's a bit of a nagging feeling in the back of my mind that felt that Xenoblade's ending was a bit lackluster in some areas. Let me explain. Xenoblade Chronicles' story starts off introducing you to the Bionis and the Mechonis, two titans that were once locked in battle until each mortally wounded the other. Ever since, the inhabitants of both the Bionis and the Mechonis have been at war with one another. Shulk, the protagonist of this story, gets caught up in the conflict when his childhood friend Fiora is killed during one of the Mechon invasions of Bionis. And so, off Shulk and Rind go to avenge Fiora and make the Mechon pay for killing the denizens of the Bionis. It's a very interesting setup. I mean, machines killing off humans, taking control of them. You guys ever seen The Matrix? Pretty sure we ate that movie up like it was our Sunday morning breakfast, okay? How can you not have a plot that's compelling when it involves robots and machines against humans? Tie that in with some really interesting gameplay mechanics and plot line where Shulk's weapon, the Monado, gives him visions of the future, which help prevent him and his friends from getting killed by the murderous Mechon, both as a plot-driven mechanic and gameplay-driven one as well. There's no denying that Xenoblade Chronicles drove the new standard for how JRPG combat should be done. Using the Monado to cast shield on your allies to protect yourselves from a potentially game-ending enemy art is something that never gets old. I think that's one of the reasons people are able to appreciate the game's plot so well, because you actively feel like you're changing your party's fate through your actions as you go throughout the game. And it's not just all done for you within cutscenes. That's not to say the cutscenes that are shown are lackluster though. It's probably one of my favorite things about the Xenoblade games. Point being, it's a formula that really cannot or should not be beaten. So you go throughout the game, fighting Mechon after Mechon, battling the faces that once wrecked your entire party early game. Mumkar, man, what a great villain. All this building up toward the fight with the main antagonist, Egil, the leader of Mechonis. And man, is the fight with him an epic one. He's sitting there trying to destroy the Bionis while controlling the Mechonis a la Gundam Wing. Eat your heart out, man. Woo! woo, this shit was cool. But then God pops out a Shulk out of nowhere and says, fuck the Bionis, fuck the Mechonis, we're bringing this world back to net zero, baby, yeah! I'm really feeling it! Also, Dixon, honestly, by the time he betrayed the party, I literally said the words, holy shit, finally, instead of gasping in awe and shock, which is what the game clearly wanted me to feel during this moment. It's so painfully obvious that Dixon is going to betray you throughout the entire game, because the foreshadowing here isn't really foreshadowing. It's obvious that something's up with Dixon and that he's going to twist the knife in your back at some point, but it takes so long to actually happen that by the time his betrayal comes around, I literally stared at it blank-faced. For God's sake, he even says he feels bad for betraying you in Satoral Marsh, and that's really early in the game. If they had just threw in hints more subtly throughout instead of making the foreshadowing so damn blatant, maybe I would have felt differently. Dixon's character and his motivations bore me overall though, so that could be another reason why I just didn't really feel anything during his betrayal. And that's not to mention Zanza himself. With him, it feels like there wasn't enough foreshadowing. Keep in mind that this whole Zanza twist, who is really barely mentioned throughout the game, only really starts to become a worry for our characters near the very end of Chapter 15. There are 17 chapters total. Having only 2 very short chapters to wrap up a crazy twist on the events that occurred at the end of Chapter 15 was never a good idea. It feels like one of those shoot-in storylines that someone in the back of the room at Monolith Soft came up with as a, well, we need to make this game about defying destiny and breaking out of the confines of fate, so why not bring gods in the equation to fuck shit up? However, that's not to say that I don't think Zanza as a villain fulfilled plot elements that I think this game needed answered spectacularly. The game constantly touches on the topic of free will and destiny. The Mechonis and its machines and Egil weren't going to be enough to properly get across those themes of defying fate and following your own path in life, which I think is a nice message to send. But it's one of those things where you really have to just suspend your disbelief to thoroughly enjoy and almost just turn your brain off in a way. For instance, if I were to ask you, how the hell was Shulk able to survive if Zanza was only keeping him alive by using his body as a temporary host? I'm sure some of you would attempt to explain it away by, oh, well, Shulk still had a part of Zanza in him, and that's why he was still able to see the future and use this replica Monado, and stop. It doesn't even make sense when you guys say it. Shulk came back to life because the plot required it, and Shulk's ability to still use the Monado even after Zanza left his body essentially boils down to, well, how else were they gonna beat a god? Thematically, him being alive and still being able to see the future makes sense, as Shulk and the crew are defying fate just by being able to do so. But from a logic point of view, ugh. Like I said, if you ignore the reasons behind why Shulk can still use the Monado and why he's still alive, the final boss serves as a pretty epic conclusion, especially when those button prompts appear and you're seeing Zanza's future moves, all the while he's wondering how you're able to do it. I did like that part, not gonna lie. And I have to say, after booting up the game so many times over and seeing that familiar sword in the ground across the Gour Plains, and now to move on to the new title screen, with Shulk and the rest of the party sitting side by side along one another, with their destinies forever changed and the future now unknown to them, I was left with a warm feeling you don't really get that often from video games nowadays. Even if Zanza was an albeit purposefully one-dimensional villain, I'm glad that I played the game at a time in my life where even my own future is uncertain. Hell, with the state of the world these days, I know I'm not the only one. But playing this game reminded me that even if life is filled with things like hardship, adversity, sadness, and even loneliness, it's also filled with things like happiness, friendship, companionship, and so many other things that make life worth living. So, take each day as it comes, and change your destinies for the better, my friends, as Shulk himself once did. And that marks the end of my 12-year-long journey with Xenoblade Chronicles. That's gonna be all for this one, guys. If you enjoyed the video, please make sure to like and subscribe, because that'll be my go-ahead to make a video of my thoughts on the extra story, Future Connected.